Hi, and welcome back to PEBCAC University. This is, I believe, video number 4 in our series on installing Snort. Today, as promised in our last video, we're actually going to be covering configuring Barnyard2 and making sure that that works and is able to communicate with our snorby server. So I'm going to dive right in. And let's go ahead and just start by creating a startup script for Barnyard2. We already have one for Snort, and let's just take a look at top, and we can see that we have our 2 Snort instances running. So I'm going to use VI and create a script called startbarnyard.sh. And it's going to contain the following. Going to have the path to Barnyard2, which, if you've been following along with these videos, should be user local bin. We have the -D, which I believe demonizes the process. That's why we don't have the ampersand at the end. We want it to keep running. We don't want it to run and quit and then run the next one and quit. We want both of these to keep running, and that's what the -D is going to do. Other important flags here are the -C, which tells Barnyard2 where to find its configuration file. For the first instance, we're pointing it to var snort instance-1/barnyard2.conf. And it's the same path for instance 2, just obviously instance-1 will be changed to instance-2. We're telling it to also look inside of var snort instance 1 and var snort instance 2 for the files that it's going to read and process to look for those alerts from Snort, which in our snort.conf we called snort-unified.log. So it's going to look for files that are named like this. They will obviously have a Unix epoch timestamp at the end, but it's just looking for, how do I identify those files? And it's gonna look for files that start with snort-unified.log. And we tell it to create and use a Waldo file, which is sort of Barnyard2's way of remembering where it is when processing a unified file. So if something were to happen and the process were to die and have to be restarted, it should know where to pick up. It shouldn't have to go back through every single unified file. And then, of course, we're just specifying the PID path, or the for each Barnyard2 instance here. And that's really all there is to the startup script. So I'm going to go ahead and save and quit, and then make that executable. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and just throw that into etc rc.d rc.local so it runs on system startup. And now we'll move into the var snort instance 1 directory, and let's look at that Barnyard2 configuration file. So once again, I'm going to use VI on barnyard2.conf. And I strongly recommend that you look through this file to see if there's any additional thing you would want to change. But the things that I usually set are here, the making sure that the reference file, classification file, etc. all point to the correct paths, which in this case they do, which is under etc snort. One thing I'll do is I'll uncomment config hostname. And you can put the host name here. What I'm going to do is, since the server is Snort1, that's its host name, I'm going to call this Snort1 underscore 1. And that's, again, Snort1 is the host name. And I did the underscore 1 to identify the instance. So this is instance 1. And once we have Barnyard2 talking to Snorby, you'll see why I did that. It'll make a lot more sense. It makes it easier to distinguish which Snort instance sent an alert. Whether in this case it was instance 1 or 2. You don't have to configure the interface, but you're more than welcome to. So you could uncomment this and put, for instance, BR0. And you'll see we're skipping over certain options like config Waldo file. We're leaving that commented because we're actually doing that on the command line in our startup script. So we don't need to change it here. One thing I want to change is uncomment config archive directory, because we want to archive into instance 1 archive. You'll leave input unified to uncommented. There's nothing else, even as it says above it, there's no other format supported, so it has to be there. And it's convenient since we're obviously going to be giving it unified 2 files. Now we get into our output methods. Our output method is going to be database, since we're going to be writing to the MySQL database that's on our Snorby server. There should be an area. Okay, here we go. And it even sort of gives you the format for different databases. And following along with that format above, we have output database, alert, because we want to send alerts, which is all that's going to be written to our Snort unified files. We're not logging everything. We just want to know about traffic that triggered Snort alerts. And we're going to send those alerts to a MySQL database. We're going to change that to root. Later we could create a Snort user in the database on the Snorby server, but just to keep it simple for right now, let's use root. And I put in the root password for the MySQL server, which if you remember when we set that up, we used password1 with a capital P. Database name is going to be equal to Snorby. What may seem odd to you right now is the fact that I've used localhost for the host address, even though the MySQL server is on a separate server running Snorby. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And it has to do with the fact that we're going to be using stunnel. Same for the port. You'll notice this that we're using port 3308. You'll see why I've selected these once we're setting up stunnel. And you'll want to put in here to disable signature reference table. The reason for that is that's not something that needs to be updated by every Barnyard instance, meaning we don't need both Barnyard instances to do that. So we're actually going to say disable signature reference table in both instance 1 and instance 2's barnyard2.conf files. And later, anytime we update the rule set using pulled pork, we'll launch a third Barnyard2 instance just for updating that. And that's really all we need to set in here. So not a whole lot to change in here. I'm going to go ahead and save and quit this file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it into var snort instance 2. Because for both instances, the configuration is going to be pretty much the same. We will want to change the host name in the instance 2 Barnyard configuration to say snort1-2 for instance 2. And let's just make sure we haven't specified that anywhere else. Right, one other thing we want to change is the config archive directory. We want to change that to -2 for instance 2. Okay, so what we need to do now is let's get stunnel up and running. So we're going to cd into etc stunnel. And you'll see there's an stunnel.cnf. Let's take a look at that. And it kind of gives you, an idea of the configuration here. But we're going to start from scratch pretty much. There's also an stunnel.conf -sample. But you can really just ignore these for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a file called stunnel.conf. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste some values in here. You'll see the cert and key lines both point to etc stunnel.pem. Now you'll notice that file wasn't there, so we're going to create that in just a moment. We give it a PID path of temp stunnel.pid. We'll output to stunnel.log. Client, in this case, the snorby machine is going to be our server. It's the one that has our MySQL database on it. So client on the Snort machine is going to be set to yes. And we're telling the Snort machine, remember in the Barnyard2 configuration, we told it to connect to localhost on port 3308. So we're telling Snort here to accept connections on port 3308. And then to take that and connect to our snorby machine, which my IP address is for that is 192.168.19.200. And we're telling it to connect on port 3309. So once you have this, I'm going to go ahead and save and quit. And you'll see that in Slackware we get this handy dandy generate stunnel key.sh script. So let's go ahead and run that. And it's going to ask for your country code. So I'm in the US. You can set this to, you should set this to whatever your state or province name is, but again, I'm just going to accept the defaults. We'll just leave it set that way, even though I'm not in Poland. And you'll see now we have an stunnel.pem file. So what I've done now is switched over to our Snorby server. I have another putty session opened up to it. And we're sort of going to do the same thing. We're going to go into etc stunnel and create an stunnel.conf. I'm actually going to And to make things a little easier, I'm just going to paste in the same values from the Snort server. Except this time, client will equal no, because this is our Snorby machine and this is the server. MySQL. We're going to accept connections from Snort on port 3309. And then we're going to connect to ourself, the Snorby server, on port 3306, which is the port that MySQL is actually going to be listening on. In fact, we'll do a quick net stat here. And you see, when we set up MySQL, I forgot about skipped networking. So we're going to edit etcrc.d rc.mysqld. And wanted to locate the skip networking section, and we'll just comment that out, and that should be enough, I believe. Next, we'll just restart MySQL. MySQLd restart. And I'll give that just a moment before hitting the enter key. Now let's run our net stat again. And you'll see that we are, MySQL is listening on port 3306. So we're still in the stunnel directory. The last thing we need to do is generate the stunnel key. So now we have both our stunnel.conf and our stunnel.pem. So all we need to do now is start stunnel. Should be user bin stunnel, and then the path to its configuration, which would be stunnel stunnel.conf. So etc stunnel stunnel.conf, and just hit enter. And now you'll see that stunnel is actually running. So if we flip back to our Snort machine, notice that we are on Snort 1 now. we'll do the same thing to start it up. We'll do user bin stunnel etc stunnel stunnel.conf. And we'll see it's also running on the Snort machine now. Time to start Barnyard. So back in our root directory, let's run our start barnyard.sh script. And this will probably take around a minute or so to start up, so we'll wait for it to give us back the prompt. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen again, and let's just look at the PS output and see. Well, Barnyard is not running. Let's find out why. A great place to start is going to be varlog messages. And we see one of the instances starting here, the instance 2. And it's running in continuous mode. And we see the event cache size getting set, and then Barnyard exits. Not really a lot of information in there about why it exited. So let's try varlog syslog. Sometimes there's some extra details in there. And here we have 2 Barnyard instances with PIDs 894 and 895 with fatal errors. Stat check on log directory, varlog barnyard2 failed. Easy enough to fix. Do a make directory varlog barnyard2. And then we'll retry the Barnyard startup. And it gave us back our prompt, so let's check PS again for any signs of Barnyard activity. Still nothing. So we'll go back to varlog syslog. And there were our previous fatal errors. In this one we got connect blocking. Connect to 192.168.19.200.3309. Connection refused. Well, stunnel is listening on the snorby server on port 3309. So why are we failing? Connection refused. I'm going to go back into the snorby server and edit the stunnel.conf file. And I'm actually going to specify the address of the Snorby server on the accept line. I'm going to change the connect to the loopback address. And then back on Snort, I'm going to try the start Barnyard again. I'm actually glad that we're hitting these errors because it gives me a great opportunity to show you where to look for why things are failing and how to work around them. All right, and after making that change and to the stunnel.conf that we just made on the Snorby side, now you'll see that we have Barnyard instances running on the Snort server. I'm going to go ahead and open up Firefox. You can use whichever browser you prefer. I'm going to go ahead and punch in the address of the Snorby machine. Sorry for the delay there. These are all running as virtual machines on the same box, so things are a little slow. I'm going to log in with the default user that's there. To be honest with you, I've forgotten the name that we had created. Admin at localhost.localdomain. I'm going to go ahead and log back in as that user. Amazingly though, I remembered the password. Probably because I set it to something very simple. And since we have our Barnyard instance started, or instances started on Snort, we should have something under the sensors field. And you'll see it has Snort 1_1 and Snort 1_2. And then you can actually give it a name that you would prefer. I'll call it inst1 and inst2. And apparently clicking away is not good enough. So I'll type that in and press enter. You would want to give these, better, more distinguishable names. This is really just a simple little name that I came up with here. But in a production environment, you might want something a little bit more than just inst1 and inst2. And when you have events, you can look at things like which sensor's reporting the most events, and it'll be divided. In this case, it's all coming from one Snort sensor, but two separate instances. And we don't actually have any events yet, but I did want to go back into First, our Snorby server. And just wanted to add a startup line of user bin stunnel etsy stunnel stunnel.conf. And the same thing on our Snort server. So we'll just edit rc.local. I'm going to squeeze that in between the actual Snort startup and the Barnyard startup, because we do want stunnel running when Barnyard starts up. And as the unified files in each instance directory are processed, they should get moved into the archive directory. Obviously, there's nothing there just yet, but that should happen eventually. And that is how you configure Barnyard2 to write to a Snorby database. I'm going to go ahead and end the video for now. I think that's enough to cover in this one session. We'll pick up next time by actually getting some events into Snorby. We'll create a rule that we know will trigger on whatever traffic we're sending through these sensors. And we'll move along a little bit more with this whole setup. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And I hope you will subscribe to our channel. We have more great videos just like this one planned and on the way for you. So thanks a lot.